Our next paper giver this morning is Christine Zabel. Christine did her maîtrise at the École des Hautes Études in Paris, a PhD at Heidelberg University, where she taught for a time. She's currently in a postdoc position at the University of Duisburg-Essen in Germany. So she's come a long way to be with us today, and will be speaking this morning on disguising gender and cloaking sex, authenticity, appearance, and affect in the French Enlightenment. Christine.
Thank you, Paul. This paper aims to explore the phenomenon of disguising gender and of cloaking sex, or cross-dressing, in the French Enlightenment, and will link this analysis to a broader discussion virulent since the outgoing 17th century, the discussion about authenticity, appearance, and effect. In the Ancien Regime, cross-dressers appeared both in reality and fiction, and exploring the factional side in a first step and the fictional side of the phenomenon in a second step, and bringing them together in one analysis will be the aim of this paper. But what I will present here is not a research project I've been pursuing for a long time. Consequently, what I present here is not simply an account. Now I lost myself. It's not simply an account of my own research. Rather, this paper owes a lot to Rudolf Decker, Lotte van de Poel, Joseph Harris, Gertrude Lehnert, Sylvie Steinberg, or of course Gary Cates. The subject of disguising gender and cloaking sex is only very loosely linked to my fields of expertise. My dissertation dealt with the question of authenticity and politeness, and in my new research project that aims to explore strategies of dealing with failure in the 18th century France and its colonies, I'm concerned with failed sexuality as well as failed gender roles. So I hope to add a new perspective on a topic that has been studied more by the before-mentioned researchers than by me, and I'm very interested in what this audience has to say or to add to my trial. The first female cross-dressers in France we know of emerged in 1535, and we have at least over 300 cases for the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. In the 19th century, however, this tradition of cross-dressing decreased, and I hope we can discover some reasons for this change. Female cross-dressers came mainly from lower social stratums. They were very often half orphans or orphans and tried to improve their economic situation with a job, mainly at sea or as soldiers on land. This, for the most part, explains why there were far more female cross-dressers than male, of course, because they could, by means of changing their gender role, improve their economic and social situation. But we also have examples of disguised males who improved their social position by way of cross-dressing. This is the case of Antoine François de Rue, an orphan of bourgeois origin who in 1777, aged 33, poisoned first a noble woman and then her minor son in Paris, and afterwards went to Lyon and disguised as his female murder victim. De Rue got caught and was sentenced to death by the Parlement de Paris in May of the same year. The very fact that De Rue planned the murder and then disguised as his female victim, as well as that he was said to be born as hermaphrodite, made this case not an ordinary murder, and therefore gained a lot of attention in 18th century Paris. As this case shows too, most often the transformation and the appropriation of another sex took place somewhere far from home, where people who knew the disguise from birth could recognize them. Most women were between 16 and 25 when they decided to live as a man. In order to do so, they did not only need men's clothing, but had to get used to new social habits. They had to change their mimic, their gestures, their word choice, and also, most often, their sexual preferences, or at least their choosing. The lack of beard growth was covered by lying about the actual age of the disguised. Women who cloaked their sex seemed younger as men their age, and consequently, these women most often did not only change their name, but also their date of birth. To live on a ship or on a military camp together meant for disguised women to live with very little privacy. For that reason, they had to be extremely cautious not to be discovered when they had to change clothes or use the bathroom, etc. Jeanne Barré went for a tour du monde on Bougainville's ships, and Bougainville's account make clear how difficult it must have been for a woman to hide her true sex. In his account of May 1768, he tells us, I cite, « Depuis quelque temps, il courait un bruit dans les deux navires que le domestique du monsieur de Commerson, nommé Barré, était une femme. Sa structure, le son de sa voix, son menton, son marbre, son attention scrupuleuse à ne jamais changer de linge, ni faire ses nécessités devant qui que ce fût, plusieurs autres indices avaient fait naître et accrédité le soupçon. » But Bougainville also tells us about the male qualities of this supposedly female Barré and how hard it was to object somebody to this crime de travestissement. I cite again. Cependant, comment reconnaître une femme dans cette infatigable Barré, botaniste déjà fort exercé que nous avions vu suivre son maître dans toutes ses arborisations au milieu des neiges et sur le mont glacé du détroit de Maguelon, et porter même dans ses marches pénibles les provisions du bush, armes écaillées de plantes avec un courage et une force qui lui avaient mérité du naturaliste le surnom de sa bête de somme. We see how difficult it was to hide one's true biological sex in this situation on a ship or in a military camp. Some of the disguised women used leather corsets to cover their breasts, and as Montaigne already told us in his Journal Voyage, some of these women even used artificial penises in order to save their secret. They built leather penises and cotton-stuffed testicles and or used a little pipe they hid in their pants, and that enabled disguised women to disburden themselves in an upright position. Indeed, most soldier women were only discovered when they were wounded or killed on the battlefield. Some of these women were such perfectionists in their disguise that they even got married to another woman without raising suspicion. When some of them eventually got caught, the wives were sure that they had not known about this secret until the wedding, or even also after. They were convinced, at least so they said, that they had not had any idea that they had been married to a woman. This explanation, of course, has to be regarded with suspicion. It most probably was just an excuse before the judges to escape severe punishment. However, we also have to admit that we are not ready to believe the wives of transvestites that they did not know about their partner's secret, partly because we most often imply that transvestism goes hand in hand with homosexual practices. But we indeed have a lot of evidence that the change of clothing into the clothing of the other sex served also, and very often so, as a heterosexual erotic role play, as Nathalie Zeman Davis has pointed out, and enable the female sexual partner to become a more active part in the sexual encounter, for example, by leaving their prudence behind or even by lying on top of a man. The 17th century writer Guillantin Monriot tells us about a prostitute who changed her clothes with her customer and lay on top of him. Also, the very well-known Abbé de Choisy, for example, used disguise to seduce young women who on their part should, in his sexual plays, dress as men. Choisy made Charlotte made dress up like a man and called her his petit amant. But de Choisy was also convinced that his own disguise helped him to seduce women. In his memoir, Charlotte says about de Choisy's disguisement, « Je ne me suis point défendue, comme j'aurais fait contre un homme. Je ne voyais qu'une belle dame, et pourquoi se défendait de l'aimer? Quels avantages vous donnent les habits de femme? » According to Charlotte, de Choisy's seduction was successful thanks to his male heart and inner beauty and his female appearance, an appearance of the plus beau sexe. Again, Charlotte tells us, le cœur de l'homme y est qui fait ses impressions sur nous, et d'un autre côté, les charmes du beau sexe nous enlèvent tout d'un coup et nous empêchent de prendre nos sûretés. We already heard about a courtesan who took men's clothing in order to lay on top of her guest. Indeed, there was a phenomenon that many female prostitutes disguised as men. Why they did that is not entirely explained, either to imply for their heterosexual male customers that they would be open to different kind of sexual role plays and positions, or to attract homosexual male customers. So very often disguised persons also seem to attract people of their own sex and lead to homosexual encounters. The Abbé de Choisy tells us that he not only used his disguise for heterosexual role plays, but that he also had male companions. J'ai joué la comédie 5 mois durant sur les théâtres d'une grande ville comme une fille. Tout le monde y était trompé, j'avais des amants que j'accordais de petites faveurs. Fort réservés sur les grandes, on parlait de ma sagesse. We can see from what we know about cross-dressers that the act of disguise was followed by many measures of transgressing legal and social boundaries. We saw that the act of disguise was followed by change of name, of birth date, of environment, of clothing and habit, even sometimes of sexual partners. In this sense, cross-dressing challenged the natural and biblical order in its very heart. By changing sexual power relations, cross-dressing challenged the relationship between men and women. By homosexual practices, cross-dressing challenged biblical order against sodomy and tribity. By means of disguise, the cross-dresser almost always searched for an improvement of his, her given social position, maybe with the exception of the Chevalier d'Eon, and was therefore challenging the political and social order. We might therefore want to look deeper into a legal and judicial approach to the problem of cross-dressers. Two 18th century judicial treatises dealt with the problem of transvestites, one written by Daniel Just of the year 1769 and one by Muillard de Vouglan from 1780. They both attach cross-dressing to le crime de faux. However, Just differentiated between le faux par parole, par écriture ou par fait, and precise that cloaking sex was a crime du faux par fait. He puts it in the following words: c'est aussi un faux que de se déguiser, de changer de sexe pour tromper d'autres personnes. Also, according to Vouglan, cross-dressing was a form of supposition de personne. But other than for Jus, for him, le déguisement was not a crime on its own, but instead it led to further crimes. In his words, cette supposition ne forme proprement un crime que qu'elle tend à en faire commettre d'autres, comme lorsqu'on porte des masques et qu'on prend des habits d'un autre sexe pour commettre des assassinats ou vols ou pour faire des insultes à des tiers. These legal accounts show that dealing with cross-dressers mainly was about authenticity of a social role. Se travestir was forbidden because somebody dissembled to be someone he or she was not qua birth, and the law enforced and maintained authenticity qua birth. Consequently, these jurists searched to maintain a social order that should not be changed by artificial or voluntary acts. Only birth could and should define a person's social status and sex, and should therefore be unchangeable. In the dealing with cross-dressers, we can see the old regime struggle with the danger of altering or changing the given social and hierarchical order. The jurists saw the act of cloaking your birth-given sex as a crime de faux, and every crime de faux endangered the existing natural and sacred order of society. The struggle with and against cross-dressers can therefore be seen as the will and means to maintain the ancient rights of the old regime. However, not only in social situation, but also in literature, the topic of transvestites and disguise emerged increasingly during the early modern period. Since the second half of the 17th century, we can even discover a literary topos of a woman soldier, a female soldier hero that was disguised as male in contemporary, increasingly militarized France. It combined the heroism of mythological Emerson's and French patriotism. Works such as Jean de Préchac's Héroïne Mousquetaire from 1678 and M's, it was an anonymous author, most probably female, Histoire de la Dragonne of the year 1703 tells us fictional stories about historical contemporary women who actually served as soldiers under Louis le Grand. The novels show a great love to detail and attest a great insight into the life of a disguised woman, so that we can speak of a literary realism, and we can find in there all criteria I mentioned before for our historical cross-dressers. But what is new now is that the novel tries to emphasize the virtue of the disguised heroine, who served her country in the bravest manner one could imagine. A girl named Geneviève Prémois, later known as Chevalier Balthazar, was the virtuous protagonist of the novel Histoire de la Dragonne. In the novel, the heroine's gender change was not considered as something unnatural or illegal, nor was it presented as a danger to the existing order of society. In the contrary, the author tries to convince his or her readers of the natural and virtuous character of this act of disguise. In order to present Geneviève's life-changing decision to live as male, the anonymous author shows us that Geneviève, though of female sex, was of male gender by characterizing her with male attributes and showing her envie de play soldier as a child. The author tries to show that even though of female sex, Geneviève had the heart of a man and had to live according to the call of her soul. To live according to her true identity, she, the author still uses female personal pronouns, had to leave home. The text now describes in detail the precautions by somebody who wants to disguise his or her biological sex. Geneviève took all the money she could afford, bought a chevalier's equipage under which she could easily cloak her sex, and organized a valet and left. Far away from home, she ordered a dressmaker who made her man's clothing and who she told that she should model for her brother, who had the same size as she had. After the sewer left, she had everything she needed to live a life of a chevalier, and she could now, so the author's interpretation, enjoy her newly gained liberties as a chevalier. The author tells us now that Geneviève had achieved to have all male marks and that she had changed her birth name into Chevalier Balthazar. And from this moment on, the author uses male personal pronouns for his heroine. Elle se fit appeler du nom de Chevalier Balthazar, qui serait celui que nous lui donnerons dans la suite de cette histoire, où la postérité la plus éloignée apprendra que sans distinction de sexe, d'âge et de condition, il n'y a point d'obstacle qui puisse s'opposer au généreux dessein d'un cœur qui aspire à la gloire des héros. In the novel, we can detect a crucial clash of biological sex and inside true gender. Geneviève's original appearance did not correspond to her inner gender, and that was, according to the author, male. For that reason, disguise was a means to bring authenticity and truth to the identity of the protagonist. To cloak her biological sex was therefore a virtuous act. It enabled her to live in liberty and to serve her country as a soldier and chevalier. Also in literature, without the claim of realism, cross-dressing and cloaked sex served as an instrument to uncover the truth, as Marivaux's young woman, who in his play La Fausse Suivante disguised as a chevalier in order to get to know her fiancé's true feelings and motivation to marry her. Marivaux lets his disguised chevalier say, Je résolus sur le champ de profiter de mon déguisement pour me mettre au fait de l'état de son cœur et de son caractère, qu'enfin nous liâmes amitié ensemble aussi promptement que de cavaliers peuvent le faire. As Marivaux's comedy shows, disguise of the biological sex was not only a literary instrument to bring out truth and authenticity, but was also a means to escape the boundaries of gendered social roles. Le chevalier could befriend his fiancée, something that would not have been possible for a young woman. But turning gender roles upside down, the cross-dressed also shows the truth about gendered behavior and its boundaries. By transgressing these boundaries, the disguise makes them apparent to the world and shows the difference between appearance and inner world, and therewith uncovers true and false affection. In Marivaux's play, the cross-dress takes her mask as a means to unveil others and speak the truth, similar to a traditional arlequin. The question of authenticity and appearance of the true affection, as well as of to which extent a society needs mask in order to be sustainable, had been crucial to a moral and intellectual discussion since the middle of the 17th century. In Molière's Le Misanthrope of the year 1666, the question of authenticity versus necessary social masking became the core subject of the play. In Le Misanthrope, Molière describes a society that only functions because relationships and interactions between persons were performed by the virtue of politesse. Politesse, gentle moods and self-centered behavior into expectable manners. Molière's protagonist, Alceste, however, refuses these conformities in the name of authenticity and sincerity. Je veux qu'on soit l'homme et quand tout rencontre le fond de notre cœur, de nos discours se montre, que ce soit lui qui parle et que nos sentiments ne se masquent jamais sous des vains compliments. What Molière in the second half of the 17th century discussed mainly for the art of conversation, our anonymous author of the Histoire de la Dragonne brings and adds to an individual's whole identity. In Molière's Misanthrope, Philinte wants to take away all masks in order to show authentic feelings. In the case of the cross-dressed Geneviève, it is the mask, however, that enables the chevalier to live according to his male and masculine inner and true self. The female-to-male cross-dressed literary heroines show that artificial appearances not necessarily point to wickedness and untrue feeling, but to authenticity. These 18th century fictional as well as historical cross-dresses therefore proved that natural order was not unquestionable and that there could be virtue in intervening in it. That may explain why judiciary and police was increasingly interested in cross-dresses in the end of the Ancien Regime. Thank you.